Welcome to The Workplace, a podcast by CalChamber. I'm Matthew Roberts, Associate General Counsel of Labor and Employment with the California Chamber of Commerce. Hello and welcome to a special edition of The Workplace. As many of you may have heard, there's been an announcement that there's a potential PAGA reform headed our way. And as you know, we've discussed PAGA quite a bit on this podcast over the years, largely around a lot of the shortfalls and the difficulties that PAGA has put in place for our business community. And so we're very excited to be here to talk about what might potentially be a PAGA reform initiative that we might see coming through the legislature. So I'd like to introduce a very special guest for us today. This is Jennifer Barrera, CEO and President of the California Chamber of Commerce. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
And I couldn't think of a better person to talk about our PAGA reform initiative. I know you've been working really long and hard on this for the last couple of years. I know for me personally, as a plaintiff's attorney and as a defense attorney in the employment arena for a decade or so, PAGA is always on our minds. And we know that through experience, PAGA hasn't really been working as expected, right?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So to that end, we got an initiative up on the books a couple years ago that is going to be on the ballot here in November 2024. But we had this announcement that we had recently that sounds like we might just get a compromise to the legislature and the governor's office. So Jennifer, take us through what has happened over the last few months.
Sure, and thank you so much. Of course, PAGA is a huge concern for all employers in California, and so it's really significant what's happening right now in the legislature. We have the ballot initiative that's qualified for the November ballot, but because of laws that were passed here in California, there's an opportunity to remove the ballot initiative at the end of this month if there's a compromise through the legislature, which has happened with PAGA. And so over the last couple of months, the ballot initiative has created an environment where groups from opposite sides of this issue, labor and trial attorneys, and then on the other side, businesses have had an opportunity to sit down and find common ground on things that we can do to improve PAGA so it really does have that intended impact that you had mentioned earlier, helping the workers get resolution on their labor claims, but not creating this abusive lawsuit environment or litigation environment for employers.
Yeah, that's what's so striking about the law in the first place, PAGA, Private Attorney General's Act. Been in place for 20 years, but something that we've seen over these 20 years is that it's not beneficial really to anybody between either the employers or the workers in what it's done. So what does this deal look like? I know we don't have specific language. We don't know exactly everything in detail, but I know that there's broad strokes that have been announced. So what does this deal look like?
Yeah, I mean, going into it, the goal from the business community, of course, was to cut down on the abusive litigation that we've seen through some of the data that we've been able to collect over the eight or so past years. And then, of course, from the labor perspective, I'm not representing labor, but certainly understand that their interests were, of course, protecting a vehicle that they see as really important to enforcing their rights under the labor code. And so how we achieve both of those goals is really reflected, I think, in this ultimate legislative proposal that's going to be considered this week. Some of the broad strokes are really focused, again, on the litigation aspect, changing who has the right to sue under PAGA, which has been a hugely controversial issue. As you know, right now under PAGA, anybody who's an aggrieved employee, which means just anyone who has suffered one violation, can file these really significant actions on behalf of employees for violations they didn't personally encounter. And we've changed that requirement to really limit it to only those who have personally suffered the violations, which should have an impact on the number of cases that we're seeing under PAGA. In addition to that, there is caps right now on penalties. And I think this is really a significant point of this legislative proposal in that we have so many employers in California who are trying to navigate our complex labor and employment laws. And of course, at CalChamber, we really try to help our members navigate those laws. Matt, you're at the front end.
Absolutely, yes.
But it's challenging. And so it really does take into consideration these employers who are trying to get it right, but nonetheless, of course, make a mistake or something, unintentional happens, and they have a violation. And this proposal really tries to encourage compliance by reducing their penalty exposure under PAGA if they show that they were either trying to comply with the law before they got notice of a PAGA action, or even after they get a PAGA action, that they're taking steps to be in compliance with the law. Really, again, when we're talking about the goals and balance, limiting that abusive litigation against employers who are trying to get it right, giving employees an opportunity, to be whole and made whole up front. And how do you do that? By driving compliance. And so really kind of those penalty caps perhaps help do that.
Yeah, and what I found so striking about this law is actually an appellate court decision we got a few years ago where the employer was being sued under PAGA because their pay stub, I kid you not, their mailing address that had a zip code on it, the 5 digits we are all familiar with, but they were sued under PAGA because it didn't have the +4 to the zip code with it. And this is a case that went all the way through to the appellate court system. And of course, the employer won, but that comes with so much litigation headache. So it's really good to hear that the deal looks to really minimize those kinds of abuses with it. Of course, something we've talked about, of course, is that there's multiple angles here and a lot of different vested interests in what's going on here. How does this also help the workers through this PAGA reform, get more and be made whole, as you just said?
Right. So, yeah, that is definitely a consideration. And again, it's a compromise, and so it's a balance of interest here. Employers certainly don't have any opposition to making sure employees are made whole when there's a violation that has happened. And again, so as I mentioned, the proposal to drive compliance at the front end is really helpful to employees as well, so they don't experience violations or as severe of violations. But there's also, of course, the right to cure process under PAGA that's going to be reformed as a part of this proposal, and making it more robust through both the agency and then now through the courts of a real right to cure, where employees, if an employee is kind of compensated for the violations that have been that they've suffered, that an employer can at the outset make those violations right, so to speak, cure those violations, and avoid the extensive litigation under PAGA that we've seen. Eliminates that financial exposure under penalties that we've seen for employers, but it gives employees their remedy right up front, which is, again, beneficial for the employees instead of having to wait years in litigation, as you just referenced, going up to appellate court level to kind of give that resolution. And so we really think that will be beneficial for employees as well.
Well, absolutely. I'm liking the sound of this. So where are we then in the legislative process? What can we look forward to over the next couple of weeks? It's
going to be a very busy week in the legislative process, as the bill likely will be introduced. By the time this airs, the bill should already be introduced. And then the legislature certainly will decide the bill, the pathway or vehicle, so to speak, whether it be in the Senate or Assembly. It has to pass by June 27th, because that is the deadline for that ballot initiative that's qualified for November to be pulled from the ballot. And of course, passage of this legislation is part of the conversation. The compromise is that ballot initiative will not go forward in November. And so we are up against a very firm deadline on the 27th, which means this next week will be really busy for the legislature to have hearings on it and also take votes on it and ultimately get it down to the governor's desk.
Okay, so then, of course, you discussed the word compliance as kind of part of this package, and compliance near and dear to my heart. It's
Absolutely.
Pretty much what I do here at the Chamber. So what can employers take away from this where we are now? What can anticipate that's coming from us, and other ways that they can help start to put their foot forward to meet these compliance issues and start to nip some of the more extreme PAGA exposure in the bud?
It's things that we tell our members all the time to do. It's developing and having an employee handbook that has up-to-date policies in it, and specifically on your wage and hour issues such as meal and rest periods, right? Making sure that those policies are compliant and updated and reviewed on a regular basis. Training your staff and your supervisors, especially on what wage and hour requirements are here in California, because those are the individuals that usually, are overseeing meal periods or rest periods and implementation of those policies. Some things other employers do are regular payroll audits, so they can identify any violations early and resolve those quickly. I know that's not feasible for all employers, depending upon their size, but that's also a really important tool that employers can utilize to be compliant. Those are some of the steps that I think employers, if they haven't been doing them already, should really consider doing as a part of protecting themselves against PAGA litigation.
Well, excellent. Jennifer, I know you're incredibly busy. I'm really thankful for you to appear on the show, so thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you, listeners, for joining this episode of The Workplace. Please share this episode and subscribe to the podcast at calchamber.com.